Welcome back, everybody, to the Raw Knowledge Podcast and the Training Fundamental series. So we're going to be getting in today to exercise selection. I am joined by my beautiful partner and fellow coach, Crystal Parsons. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, as a bit of a recap, if you've not already done so, because this particular series is meant to be listened to in hierarchical order. So it's from the most important factors to the least, just like the nutrition series. So just as a recap, I've got some notes here. 1, adherence, behavior, and lifestyle. Okay. We went through energy balance. This is starting with nutrition, macronutrients, micronutrients, then nutrient timing and supplements. And there is, as ever, as we're going to do today, recommendations and considerations on each. And then with the training series, we started with adherence again, just as a bit of a brief recap, and went to volume, frequency, and intensity, then progression, and then today we're going to be doing exercise selection, and then in the following episodes we're going to be finishing off with rest periods and tempo.
Mm-hmm. If you've missed any of the series beforehand, we do advise please go back and just listen to them, as you'll get a lot of information out of them, and this might be a little bit confusing to you if you've not watched the previous lectures beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about today is specificity. So variety, return on investment, when to swap exercises, etc. So when we talk about the principle of specificity, we think about being very specific with the outcome and the intention, i.e. the action. A lot of the time when we look for physique development, when we're looking to build muscle tissue or maximize muscle tissue and strength development, we see a lot of people doing things which are a little conflicting, shall we say. So for example, if you're a sprinter and you want to get better at sprinting, you should do more sprinting. And obviously there's specifics within that. And when we're trying to build muscle tissue, we should do things that are going to drive that outcome. So the first thing we need to look at when we're thinking about exercise selection is what are the movements, depending on where we're at with our training age, beginner, intermediate, or advanced, that derive the highest return on investment. So one thing that me and Crystal see a lot in the gym is we see a lot of young folk, and again, we were all there, doing things that have a very low return on investment, i.e. doing things that have low mechanical tension, and we're going to get into that a little bit deeper later on, and things that don't really work multiple muscle groups, i.e. you're not getting a lot out of maybe just doing something, pulling a cable across your face, because it's only maybe working 1 or 2 muscle groups. It's not really creating a lot of mechanical tension, therefore it's not stimulating muscle growth. So, in terms of starting out, compound versus isolation, we want to think about compound movements are multi-joint, okay, multiple muscle. So we're thinking about our squat variations, okay, so moving from the hips and the knees. We're thinking about hack squats, leg presses, okay, barbell squats, Smith machine squats, etc. We're thinking about our hinge movements, okay, Romanian deadlifts, okay, conventional deadlifts, stiff-legged deadlifts, etc., hyperextensions, all these things. We've then got single leg variations, so some of which are sort of squat or hinge in nature, so they're more like lunges, elevated, Bulgarian, etc. And then we've got our vertical and horizontal press and pulls, lat pull downs, pull-ups, bench presses, machine chest presses, machine rows, and the like.
So just to verify for you guys as well, so all the ones that Alex have just said, those are your compound movements. So that's when we're using more than 2 joints. So when we're doing like a squat, we're hinging, so hips as well as knees. So just to cover that off, those are compound movements, your biggest movements.
And our isolation would be things that we're moving conversely from what Crystal said, 2 joints or more to a single joint movement. So think about now your flies, cable flies, okay? We're thinking about bicep curls, tricep extensions, etc.
Leg extensions, leg curl. Yeah.
All of those things. So generally, and again, there's always a rule that breaks the law, but in the early stages, you want to be prioritizing those compound movements to improve your return on investment. If your physique development is low, there is no point in starting out with isolation exercises and putting energy towards something like that when you could be doing a compound movement and recruiting more muscle fibers, creating more, mechanical tension, and therefore stimulating a little bit higher in growth. So Before I continue on, anything that you wanted to add to that?
The only thing that I would say is, especially when you are starting out, so compound movements are very taxing on the body. So if we think about fatigue, your fatigue can become quite high very quickly. So with those ones, it's just making sure that you are, one, looking at your tempo, which we will go over, also looking at the technique, so watching the videos in our video archive to make sure that we are doing them correctly, and make sure that you warm up for these sets. And when I'm saying warm up, I mean do the exercise so practice the exercise that we're wanting to do. So let's just say if it's a squat, you'd want to be doing a couple of sets with the squat to build up to your working set. So maybe the bar, then maybe put a 5 on, a 10 on, and then build yourself up so you are nice, warm and comfortable, ready to go for the actual exercise itself.
100%. As we say to a lot of our clients, it's not just what you do, it's how you do it.
It's definitely how you do it.
And stimulus fatigue ratio is something that we'll definitely dive into, because that's really big. I think
it is.
We can waste a lot of energy sometimes on these big barbell movements, but if we don't have the technical aspect, we might be better to start with something like a leg press or a hack squat, which guides that movement.
And knowing when you're feeling fatigued is actually knowing and understanding your body as well. So it's not just like, oh, I feel tired, I'm so fatigued, blah, blah, blah. No. You actually have to learn how your body processes fatigue and how it actually feels. So it's about learning more about that, and especially as well when you do get into more of the intermediate and advanced kind of lifter, let's say, these things are so important. So that's why we're bringing them to light now, as we're also just when you're starting out in the gym.
Absolutely. And some considerations around, if your goal is to maximize muscle tissue size versus strength, is that 2/3, and we have talked about this previously, of your volume or your allocated exercises should be more towards building muscle tissue. So they'd be in that 8 to 12 plus range, and maybe 1/3 in that 6 to 1 range or below 6.
Yeah.
That's more strength, right? Because strength is a skill. But as a wise friend once said to me, a bigger muscle has the potential to be a stronger muscle, and a stronger muscle has the potential to be a bigger muscle, which means there is a relationship between size and strength. But at some point, we have to prioritize one over the other, or we have to at least pay one attention, or we have to pay them both attention. We have to understand where we delegate that volume, because if we are trying to build muscle size and we're too busy building strength, as Crystal said, we'll end up with just too much fatigue, and we're not then utilizing that to build volume and create more muscle tissue. Although that strength we can borrow to then do more reps on things which reduce that sort of fatigue but increase the stimulus ratio.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If you're into strength, we're more here for physique, so maximizing hypertrophy, fancy name for muscle building. You might do 2/3 in the strength rep range, but you still need some hypertrophy, because obviously you need big muscles. Muscles move weight at the end of the day. The next point I've got here is auto-regulation. Just want to talk about this a little bit. Do you want to take this one first, or do you want me to lead off?
Maybe you start it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So auto-regulation is another terminology for automatically regulating your volume, okay? But in this particular instance, we're talking about your exercises. So this is a really big question we get, like, when should you change an exercise? And it's a really good question. And it's not really a fixed metric. There are recommendations. A lot of the general knowledge will point to, every sort of 6, 8, maybe 12 weeks, we sort of hear this. But that's not necessarily true if we assume, and we're going to make some assumptions here because it is individual, that your training, your recovery, your form, everything else, your stress management is adequate. Then really progression should take you to possibly 6 months in a program, and the changes you make are more specific to perhaps rep ranges, the order of the exercises, the tempo, or it might be little changes in, for example, the attachments that you use to get that novel stimulus again. But if you continue to change exercises too frequently, the body cannot learn the skill, therefore you cannot progress over time with reps and weight, and therefore you're robbing yourself of progress. So auto regulation is just knowing when to look for that.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, if you're doing random workouts, you get random results. It's 100% that. When you'll be surprised how much we actually change a program. We don't change programs much, because when I say much, it's not, every 6 to 8 weeks, there might be subtle changes, but you won't get a brand new program, because obviously then that's whole systematic fatigue will then come in with that as well. But within regards to the auto regulation with things, when you go through a movement, right? So especially when you're just starting out and you're starting to learn a movement, you're probably only doing that movement twice a week. So how can we expect to be advanced in that movement if we're only practicing it really twice a week? So that's why we go the first 4 weeks is more about the technique. Then we bring in the tempo. With that, we'd bring in progressive overload. So we start looking at reps, start looking at sets, starting to build out on what we've just learnt. And that way, up to the first, 3 months, that is really beginning and learning that exercise. If you're changing it out after 12 weeks, you haven't really gotten much out of it. Again, especially if you're only doing, a barbell RDL or a dumbbell RDL twice a week, you're not really maximizing on it. So it's important to note that when we do make the subtle changes, we're not going to be swapping out an exercise, especially if it is a great exercise that's actually working for your body. There's no point fixing something that's not broke. If you're still getting results out of that exercise, we're going to keep freaking riding that exercise, right? Mm-hmm. It'd be different if your body was niggling, if you were actually having some, if it was too taxing on the body or if it was hurting in a particular way, then yes, of course, we would swap it out for another movement. But you'd find the movement that we swap it out for is going to still be a hip hinge movement or the same type of movement that you're already doing based on what you are needing. So that's probably the biggest thing to note, is that when we do, change up a program with those subtle changes, it might be something as little as the rep range or the set, or, from a barbell RDL maybe to a dumbbell RDL, things like that. So still the subtle changes, because again, we're not going to, it's what we're going on 15 years training, and we're always going to only really be intermediate, really, because we're constantly learning. The body's constantly evolving. It's really getting the demand out of the body.
It is. It's constantly evolving. I think
Absolutely.
A lot of the time we want to change an exercise because twofold, it gets hard and we don't want to push for that extra rep. Or like you said, we get bored. And that's most people who are general, but if you're trying to maximize, you want an above average physique, then changing your exercises every 12 weeks is not the way to do it.
Exactly, for everything that I just said. And it is 100% on the money, where people will get bored before they actually outwork their training program.
And it's not sexy, but it's the truth. And if you're here for the real deal. So that's all the regulation. So I guess to finish that point off, when, as Crystal said, what are you looking for? Usually if you're not recovering from your workouts, okay, meaning that you're perpetually sore, what's the word I'm looking for here? Your ability to want to train, your arousal, that's what they call it, your arousal, not sexually, to train gets low, as in you don't want to go in, you're not getting pumps, etc., your sleep's affected. And I always say, often just go back to those main points and look at how's your stress management, how's your sleep, how's your food, how's your hydration, how's your technique. It's usually one of those things, because we're so easy to rationalize a change. Like Crystal said, oftentimes it's a small change that we need, but if those things are not satisfied, it's usually one of those things. You get your sleep back in alignment, you get your form, you manage your stress, you get your hydration, your food, all of that, then you will continue to progress oftentimes. And if not, a small change can do it. Or a deload, which is a purposeful reduction in volume. You're sort of reducing, you're letting fatigue reduce back down, the body's overcompensating, you're recovering, and then you can usually catch that wave again as you reintroduce volume, or maybe you have to, as Crystal said, move it around a little bit, and then you can keep progressing. Okay, so last couple of things. We've touched on range of motion, tempo, and order, and we will just do a little bit more on that, because we are going to deep dive into that on tempo. Weak points and specialization blocks. So people think, okay, if I want bigger arms, do more arms. Not necessarily untrue. But if you try to increase volume on everything, because usually we want to be bigger everywhere, it's not going to work, because we only have so much energy and recoverable volume that we can actually manage. So therefore, specialization blocks And weak points should be addressed in the physique. And you have to look at what is an actual weak point from an aesthetic point of view, not just a functional point of view. Because, say, for example, certain muscle groups I don't consider them strong, but they're well developed. But I might have a strong muscle group, but it's not developed muscularly. And that doesn't always correlate, but you've got to try to be more objective than subjective with it. So you may go through blocks where you allocate more volume to, say, arms and shoulders, or it might be quadriceps and glutes. But you have to cycle this. You can't just perpetually increase everything, because as we've talked about in past episodes, if you turn the volume and the intensity and the frequency up on everything, well, that's insanity, and you can't recover or you cannot sustain it. Anything from you on that one?
Not on that one.
Specialization blocks?
Nah, be good with that one.
Okay. So last thing, just to comment on, just a quick point on range of motion, tempo, and order, because we're going to get into this. So order initially, as a general rule of thumb, you're going to start with your compound movements, your bigger movements that are going to accumulate more fatigue, more stimulus. You prioritize those, and then you're going to end with isolation, generally in the beginner to intermediate. As you get into intermediate, advanced, or enhanced lifters, so generally that would be best for natural. When we go to enhanced lifters, we'll often look at if the development is there, which it should be at that point before you use enhancements. You may start with isolations and use pre-fatigue, because now you are much stronger. There's a lot more muscle tissue. You want to pre-fatigue that muscle. So therefore, when you get to the compounds, you have less fatigue, neurological fatigue, and therefore you're training that muscle already in a fatigue state to induce more hypertrophy. And obviously, because you've got the recruitment, or should I say the aid of enhancements, you can recover faster and you are stronger. So this is just a way to protect ligament damage and to get more from less. It's a more efficacious way to do things.
So how that would look like in retrospect is, let's say if we were wanting to put a bit more focus into like hamstrings, it would be, doing a seated leg curl or a standing leg curl, whatever variation of leg curl, in before actually doing a squat pattern, let's say, or
Absolutely.
a hip hinge.
Yeah, no, that's good actually. Some real life examples, and we will get into intensifiers and whatnot later on. So that's for order. In terms of tempo, we're going to dive into that in tempo, but I'm going to keep it simple. Control your weights. Control both parts of the movement. I am stating the obvious, but many of you do not do this. You do not control both parts of the movement. You use gravity, you use momentum. If you use momentum and not muscle, you're not growing muscle. You're not maximally growing muscle. So you can grow muscle and you can gain strength unintelligently by swinging weights around, but you're not going to maximize it, and you're going to hit a wall and you're going to injure yourself. So controlling both movements, making sure you're slowing the eccentric generally a little bit more than the concentric. And range of motion, you want to be going through the largest range of motion you can. Muscle grows in the stretched, in that eccentric position. So the more we can lengthen a muscle safely over time, we actually build mobility. Ironically, we're actually causing more muscle damage, more metabolic fatigue, okay? And then we're also going to improve our joint, ligament, and tendon health, which again sounds ironic, because if we use good form and an appropriate load, we're giving the body and all of the anatomy, the physiology, the opportunity to adapt to that by not swinging on things and by going through those deeper ranges of motion, which is only maximize muscle.
And quite funnily is that's the part where people rush.
Yes.
So that's when they're using gravity. So it's the hardest part, right? So to put that in perspective as well, so if you're doing an RDL, it is when you're actually coming down, so when you're lengthening out the hamstrings. So that there is causing the most muscle damage, and that's the part where we grow in, right? It's not when you're pushing the floor with your feet and coming back up. That's when we're shortening the hamstring. It's when we're wanting the time, the tension, the load on the hamstring as we're lengthening it. So if you take that into all of your other training, your body's just going to friggin' go from 0 to 100 real quick.
And it means you can get a lot more from a lot less as well.
A lot less,
which is another really ironic point.
Yeah. And
as you would say, hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight. And that's definitely one thing that I would throw into even my training. What's really enhanced my training has been controlling that tempo.
The devil is often in the details.
Yeah. The big thing with that, though, is just making sure as well that you do drop the load. So drop the weight right back when you do start off with it, because as soon as you can feel like if you're on a leg press and if gravity's coming down with it, like if it's fast, you need to drop the load. You need to be working that load through both ranges.
So to recap, exercise selection, specificity. Do things that are specific to the goal and the outcome that you want.
Yep.
Prioritize compound over isolation if you're beginner or natural, and if you're enhanced, maybe you're doing the opposite, or you've got a combination.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of strength and hypertrophy, put more of your allocated volume towards whichever goal and outcome you want. Order regulation, understanding what those things are, what those elements are, which contribute, and when you should maybe change things, and knowing when and how to do so. Looking at weak points and specialization blocks specifically, not just trying to improve on everything. And again, this is where you might need some objective support, hence a coach is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've talked a little bit about range of motion, tempo, and order. So just keeping in mind, controlling your weights, as Crystal just talked about, range of motion, improving that and increasing it as much as you can, and ordering your exercises specifically. Anything else from you that you want to round out with?
No, that's we've gone through a lot of information just now.
So as ever, we'll put the notes and the takeaways in the show notes. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, we appreciate it. If this helped, please share it around. If you're watching on YouTube, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and of course, if you found it helpful, share it around too, and we will see you in the next episode.